Joe Budden goes in on Drake and calls him a lying, manipulative sack of crap. That's right, on episode 779, Joe Budden really went in on Drake like he has never before. And that's saying a lot for a guy that pretty much hates Drake. So let's get into it. Joe starts off the pod playing some of the greatest Drake diss tracks of all time, Exodus and Euphoria, so you already know it's going to get a little crazy. Now, I'm going to follow this by saying that some of the highlights of what Joe said was that Drake is a lying sack of crap. He has been sleeping with people's babies' moms and sending money to baby moms, and told Metro he didn't care if his mom died, he needed some beats. Joe also said that Drake is sending paperwork stopping people from entering certain spaces, and that he believes Drake is using this petition to stop the momentum of Not Like Us and ultimately get it to not be played at the Super Bowl because he does not want to be called a PDF file, and even says, hey Drake, if you're not a PDF file, why does it bother you? Which is insane for Joe to throw out there. Now to the case. Joe says he has no sympathy for Drake signing that deal, the $400 million deal, because what he believes is that he signed a bad deal and now he's trying to get out of it by petitioning his label. Joe then says Drake will never know his value because he's always been a paid worker, and that he signed a deal that he thought was good and now he regrets it and believes that Drake sold his soul because he was chasing a check. Joe then says Drake's raps indicate that he was expecting a deal far larger than the $400 million that he got in the last deal. The cast throws around a lot of numbers, things like 600, 800, but ultimately they believe that the label did not want to give him that deal because they probably had metrics that suggested that Drake wasn't really the guy that deserved that, and he had already lost all his leverage because, his best years were behind him. A little bit later, towards the back end of the pod, they start to get into the petition, and most of the cast is saying that, oh, this is likely going to be thrown out. This is just standard business practice in the music industry. Mark Lamont says it, but then later on, Ish and Mark start to come around and try to see Drake's side by saying that payola is still illegal, and he highlights the Spitzer probe in New York City. I believe he went after the radio stations and the record labels and says that Drake doing this is maybe just a leverage play to get things in discovery and have everyone kind of just give him his demands because they don't want to open up that can of worms. And Joe also says that he thinks Drake is probably right in what he said, but he's essentially opening up Pandora's box. And Joe then once again calls Drake the B word. He's done that before. And I'm telling you, man, this was really wild. I think that Joe might actually look back at this episode and realize that he went a little off the board. And it was not even just reflected in the way that he was talking about Drake. It reflected in the way that he was talking to his cast members. He was constantly telling them to shut up, be quiet, let me get my stuff off. And this is very reminiscent to 8 years ago. If you don't remember, 8 years ago, when Joe Budden started the pod, he was beefing with Drake at the time. And he was telling his cast members, be quiet, you need to go in on Drake. It became about Drake versus Joe Budden. And this is confirmed by what Marissa Mendez said, by Rory's words later on. He said that he was afraid it was going to become the Drake podcast. And in many ways, the Joe Budden podcast did become the Drake podcast. It's kind of like a reaction to Drake's career in some sense, and it's just really wild. But let me wrap up by bringing up some of the highlights of this episode that weren't at the forefront of the Drake thing. They also say in this episode that Lil Wayne recorded he went in the booth to possibly diss Kendrick, but he tried to call Kendrick and Kendrick didn't answer. The rest of the cast starts to kind of, I'm just saying, they slobbing Kendrick a bit, man. They're like, oh, Wayne shouldn't even respond to him because nobody wants to hear it. But Ish is the only one that seems to be on Wayne or Drake's side, saying that, hey, man, Lil Wayne can rap too. He shouldn't necessarily bow before the kingdom of, or bow beneath the kingdom of Kendrick, and that if he feels he can rap, he can rap. Then also something else that I highlighted was he says that he believes Drake was the beneficiary of bots. So why is he mad at Kendrick for doing that? It's a theory a lot of people have. Joe also says that Drake's fan base migrated from being cool people to incels. I don't know what data he has of that. I think it's just something that he's kind of creating in order to undermine Drake's career in the back half of his career. And he says that Drake forgot who he was fighting for, and even highlights how he was click hopping, going from the Princes to Lil Wayne to all these other folks. So he just really, really goes in on Drake. And he also says that, Drake isn't really a big business success outside of music, highlighting how his Nike, NFL, Apple, hookah, candle, and record label deals haven't worked. Now, I don't know what he means by the Apple thing. And I don't know. I thought the Apple thing went well. Then they cover the 100 gigs thing and says that, he tried to release on Instagram, and he thinks that, Ice brought this up, that, Drake owns his own music, but he doesn't have control of it. So he can't drop it in the way he wants. Now, that was the episode in a nutshell. I'm not trying to break down the whole thing. I just wanted to take the Drake diss, which is what everybody is probably looking for. Now, this is only on Patreon as of now, so I think it's going to stay Patreon for the time being. We all know Joe has probably made upwards of 10 to 20 million off of Drake, I believe, just off of all the subscriptions, the YouTube views over the last 8 years. I think that's a conservative number. And let me know what you think. Do you plan on paying for the episode? Do you feel like Joe is right in his assertion of Drake? Now, it's Drake hate era. Like, everybody hates Drake. The man could cure cancer, and people will say, oh, you cured cancer because, you wanted to sell records. You a cornball, dog. You ain't really want to cure cancer. And it's really just an uphill battle for Drake now. I mean, he's still rich. I'd still assume he's going to fight this case out. And I think he has something in the tuck, and it will ultimately lead to him possibly getting out of his contract. Who knows? Now, this is episode 779, and just to break down again, they really went in on Drake. Everybody on the cast outside of Ish was dissing Drake. You got Parks the Backpacker, who just loves to pander to that backpack type rap. I never seen him support Drake in any way on the pod. I actually think he's the biggest Drake hater. Then you got Melissa Ford, who was on an episode of Drink Champs talking about how Drake was, the one, refusing to talk about how he slid through her and Takara with relative ease. I mean, he went through those models, like I would say like Jordan in the Eastern Conference. It was really easy work. I think he got them out in 4 games, really. Then you had Ice, who's kind of middle of the road. Then you have Mark, he's the professor. And you have Flip, who was largely quiet, but I do think he contributed. It wasn't like he was just there shut up and afraid to say stuff. He tried. I mean, it's a podcast with like 8 people on it, so he got in where he fit in. It was a good episode, but it's clear Joe hates Drake's guts. And I would say by him focusing on the baby mama aspect, that he probably was a victim of Drake. And it's just odd to see Joe in this state, to root for Drake's failure, to be happy to see him kind of in this position. And I do wonder if at any point if Drake will ever respond to the people who really, really tap danced on his grave, like, are just happy to see him struggle. Yeah, man. Like I said, I think Joe will look back at this episode and realize it was the worst of him and not the best of him. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree with my assertion? I tried my best to break down this episode, and I know a lot of people will be like, oh, Danny, why are you supporting Drake? I was just trying to break down the episode and give my observations, man. Follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. I'm not playing any clips from this episode, y'all, because, I mean, it's on Patreon right now, and you don't want to get striked, bro. Joe is really He doesn't like it when you share his Patreon, man. He be sending the strike bots. All right, this is Danny from the Stop. Peace.
Chicks. Oh boy.
No, I'm not doing that.
Right here, this is the one.